Hosea Ballou came to town in 1792 to preach his radical message of universal salvation, salvation not only of God's chosen, but everyone, his words did not fall on deaf ears. Believers grew in number and enthusiasm in response to his words. But when converts to Universalism asked permission to hold a service in the Congregational Church in West Brattleboro, the only church in town at the time and of which many of them were members, their request was flatly denied.
Whereupon the Universalists took matters into their own hands. They met at the church early on a Sunday morning in 1833, barricaded themselves in. When the other Congregationalists arrived for worship, they were not allowed to enter.
Needless to say, this uprising created an irreconcilable rift between the Orthodox Christians and the emerging Universalists.
Spreading the forgiving message that punishment for sin was confined entirely to this life, the Brattleboro Society grew to be the largest Universalist congregation in the state. When the population of West Brattleboro began shifting to the banks of the Connecticut River, the Universalists, too, moved eastward. In a new building on Canal Street, this successful congregation hosted 7 national conventions.
And it wasn't only the Universalists who were born out of controversy in Brattleboro. The same Congregational Church that gave rise to the Universalists indirectly spawned the Unitarians. The second minister called to the First Congregational Church was Reverend William Wells, an Englishman, called a dissenter in his native England because he broke with the Anglican Protestants and their contention that the sovereign was head of the church. Reverend Wells was a liberal Christian.
Under Dr. Wells' leadership, his church gave up the Puritan conviction that only those who could prove that they had been called by God could become members of the church. Wells said, and these are his words,
"This church does not think it has any right to pry into the secrets of men's hearts, which after all are and can be known only to God and themselves."
This was radical theology for the time, fundamentally Unitarian theology.
But not everyone in his congregation agreed with him. When Dr. Wells took leave and went back to England to visit his children, the conservatives in his congregation hired a more orthodox, rigidly orthodox preacher to take Wells's place. When Reverend Wells returned to Brattleboro, he had no pulpit. Many in the church took his side and began to agitate for a church of their own, with Dr. Wells as pastor. This new church, still congregational in name but with Unitarian overtones in line with Dr. Wells's theology, was built on the town common in downtown Brattleboro and named Center Church.
The Unitarians erected their first building, constructed of lumber, where the stone church now stands on the corner of Grove and Main Streets in downtown Brattleboro. They called themselves the Brattleboro Unitarian Congregational Society.
The Unitarians called young Reverend Addison Brown, freshly graduated from theological school, to be their minister. He brought many innovations to town. He called for the establishment of grades in the schools. He organized the Lyceum in Brattleboro, a form of adult education, and invited many luminaries to lecture, including Horace Greeley and Mark Twain. Reverend Brown urged his congregation to stand with him against slavery, against abuse of liquor, and for women's rights and school improvement. Reverend Brown sparked action in social welfare reform, human rights, and self-improvement.
Under the leadership of many ministers over the years, the Unitarian and Universalist societies flourished. Each had vigorous women's groups that overlooked their buildings and performed charity work in the community. The Universalist women named their group the Murray Club, in honor of the feminist writer Judith Sargent Murray, wife of John Murray, the the first Universalist preacher in this country. The Unitarian women called themselves the Frem Circle, in honor of Martha Frem, who had been so instrumental in organizing the society.
All these women personified this intellectual self-reliance and this missionary zeal. They all lived in societies and times that denied women the right to education, the right to vote, the right to gainful employment. They all were told what women ought and ought not to do. They all defied the customs of their times and the strictures of their peers. They rejected accepted wisdom and followed their own stars.
There was a new vision trying to present itself. First in 1896 and again in 1915, the Universalists and the Unitarians talked of joining their congregations into one. Nothing came of these talks immediately, but as time went on, the similarities in their theologies and their missions became more apparent. Finally, in 1922, the vision was clear to both congregations. The Universalists, with their need for yet more space, the Unitarians, with their need for additional members to fill their beautiful edifice, joined into one large congregation and took the name All Souls Church Universalist Unitarian. They moved in together on Grove Street, where the Unitarians had built the stone church that stands there still. They enlarged the building next door to serve as a parish house, and they called the Universalist minister Reverend Edwin P. Wood to be their leader. 40 years before the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America officially consolidated to form the Unitarian Universalist Association, Brattleboro's two forward-looking congregations joined forces, creating a vision that combined the compassion and service that characterized Universalism and the open-minded and responsible search for meaning and social justice so dear to Unitarians.
All Souls Church Universalist Unitarian became a dynamic religious society. Each new minister brought innovations. Things we take for granted these days were new ones, like coffee hour after services, a printed Sunday morning bulletin. Under various leaders, old customs gradually faded away at All Souls. The congregation discontinued the celebration of Holy Communion, and eventually the recitation of the Lord's Prayer went the way of old habits. Many came to see that Christianity, as they had understood it, was no longer central to their religious thinking. One minister in particular, Reverend Dr. Fred Miller, witnessed a decided shift from Christ-centered theology to a theology that was strongly humanist at its core. The vision of the liberal church was changing.
A vibrant social life was one feature of the new religious community. People gathered for suppers in support of the church and to raise money for good causes. A large and dynamic youth group, in addition to holding their Sunday evening talks, put on plays, went for hikes, and visited Boston and New York City.
Religious education stood high on the church's priorities. At times, 24 people served on the Religious Education Committee.
Music was important at All Souls. Both a children's and an adult choir performed regularly during Sunday services. The Este family donated a beautiful pipe organ to All Souls in memory of a son killed in World War II.
Yet, for all the activity taking place at All Souls in the 1960s, our church became restless. It seemed to want to be more engaged in social movements taking place. A high school group against the war in Vietnam published their newsletter at All Souls Church, when school administrators refused to lend support. All Souls Church was starting to sense a new vision.
This growing spirit of involvement caused the facilities at All Souls to feel cramped. Religious education classes, confined to small, airless rooms in the basement of the parish house, were hardly conducive to innovation. Stained glass windows, the dark walnut woodwork, and the numerous stone memorial plaques lining the walls of the sanctuary seemed more and more to be out of sync with open, expansive expression of liberal religious feelings.
A new vision for All Souls Church was emerging, a vision that included modern facilities that could not be provided by simply remodeling the old sanctuary and parish house. Many at All Souls wanted a new home.
As with previous visions of the church's future, the dream of a new home did not have everyone's support. It was hard for some families to think of leaving the sanctuary where their children had been baptized and married and their parents memorialized. People who had donated to building renovations and improvements didn't want to walk away from their investments. Reverend Fred Miller resigned from the ministry altogether rather than lead the congregation to a new place. The Reverend Robert Green had little enthusiasm for the transition and soon moved away.
But the vision of a bright and airy building that would make a public statement about the dynamic new life being felt in Unitarian Universalism was strong, and the hope that a fresh, new modern structure would attract people was strong. The dream of a building designed especially for exhibiting art, staging dramas, and hosting concerts was strong. The desire to raise a building with religious education in mind, with space around it for young people to explore and play, was strong. The vision of being born again in Brattleboro was strong, and it prevailed.
The first service, held before construction was complete, took place in 1970, followed by a week of activities to mark the opening of the new All Souls Church.
And here we have remained for 40 years.
Indicative of the spirit of innovation that came with owning a modern building, no minister was called to lead the church for its first 10 years. Instead, we hired a program director, Bob McLean, a local visual artist, to oversee the activities. Aided by visiting ministers and volunteers, Bob thoughtfully provided for the many different needs of the congregation.
The Vermont Theater Company was born and lived in this church building for several seasons. The Brattleboro Music Center used the space for concerts. The plain white expanse of wall throughout the building held all manner of visual art and still does.
Recognizing that All Souls Church was serving the community in so many ways other than what the word church usually evokes, the building for some years was called, and is still called by some, West Village Meeting House.
Does this qualify Unitarian Universalism as an actual religion? Or are we closer to a social club that discusses meaning of life issues, which happens to use a church-like format because that's what works given our church's history and the history of our surrounding culture?
So much secular activity seemed to many to be swamping the religious intention in moving to a new site, and the cultural events were not enlarging the membership. The missing element? A coherent sense of religious spirit. For the next 20 years, beginning in 1980, ministers were called and settled at All Souls Church. Each brought his or her own vision and strength, but none stayed with the congregation for more than 5 or 6 years.
Besides providing fair compensation for long-term religious leadership, the congregation continually faced, and still faces, the challenge of making ours an eco-friendly building. Numerous ideas for achieving financial stability have floated in the air through the years, including the sale of the building and renting back space. But no solution gelled until the Brattleboro area Jewish community came to share West Village Meeting House. For 12 years, the activities of a dynamic Jewish synagogue and shul meshed comfortably with a vigorous Unitarian Universalist program. It was an ecumenical model that saved the day for both congregations.
When we first came to the Jewish community, the community was already renting space at All Souls Church.
And we had a lot of kids, so it was really a good experience, and they loved being here, and they loved playing outside.
And services were always really comfortable for us, although it is a church. It's not a church with a lot of religious symbolism on the walls and everywhere you looked. So we were comfortable with that and always felt that it was a good place to be. This is our default
This is our home.
setting.
This is our home away from home.
Early in December 2001, a stranger appeared at All Souls just as a worship service was about to begin. He took the lectern and began to speak, delivering a message that became more and more bizarre and incoherent. Concerned for the safety of the congregation, police were called to take into custody the man no one in the congregation knew and who was threatening to do harm to himself. What happened next has been interpreted in different ways, but in the end, the police shot the man in front of several witnesses, and Robert Woodward later died of his wounds.
What does a faith community do in light of so traumatic an event? Does it bind together to heal the shock and confusion? Does it split and take sides in unresolved controversy? Do members and friends of the congregation withdraw in fear and anger, or do they reach out to one another to comfort and try to understand opposing sentiments? Does the vision that created the community in the first place still lead the people, or is it shattered? Do new and contrary visions arise and lead the community into factions? In the long run, is it a vision of what might have been, or is it simply time that brings a measure of reconciliation and peace to the shaken people? 10 years later, scars remain, but there is also new hope that we are growing strong again.
As Director of Faith Formation, I can tell you that we offer a religious education program that challenges our children to think critically, and it stretches them intellectually without losing them.
What I like best are all the wonderful parishioners. And the best thing about All Souls Church is knowing that my heart is not alone here.
What I like best is seeing my whole family make friends and being loved.
The best thing about All Souls Church is the chance to participate in the various activities.
And here at All Souls, we offer help with the overnight shelter, we drive sick people to the doctor, and we welcome gays and lesbians, and offer the wider community an excellent children's program of religious education.
Here at All Souls, we have freedom of religious belief and expression, a perfect home for seekers of personal truth, for persons and families with mixed religious backgrounds.
We share the same values. Community is important.
And on it goes, a rousing chorus of positiveness and delight in being a whole community once more. And so it seems, a new or renewed vision of what All Souls can mean to its members and friends, and to the wider community, is emerging out of the shadow of fear and insecurity.
The people's desire to invite others in and to reach out in service to others signals the emergence of a new vision.
Our congregation is on a quest for a new vision, and the process we have chosen to give shape to that quest involves the exchanging of ideas concerning 3 questions which our minister, Reverend Barbara Hansen, puts this way.
What's the best thing about All Souls Church? What does All Souls Church have to offer the larger community? How can we serve? If you were writing the future of All Souls Church, what would you write?
Sue Graff, our church president, made it easy for people to get started.
Think about collectively what we might accomplish together as a faith community if we brought all of those little individual lists and thoughts and notions together to create a future for ourselves. That's what we're in the process of doing, and it takes all of us.
Here's what Church Treasurer Steve Squires and Worship Coordinator Christina Gibbons have to say about the process.
The act of examining these questions is, to my mind, far more important than the resulting vision statement itself. Reading a statement on paper isn't really good enough. We have to sort it out in our own minds.
The Vision Quest is a really good idea because it gives people a chance to stop and think about what this church means to them, what this church stands for, and what they want this church to be. It's not that there is something out there that we're trying to find, it's that we want to create something. And to think about that and articulate that deepens people's commitment and excitement and feels to me like a very important process at this time in the life of our church.
And as we very well know from our history as a church, whatever the vision is today, it may change as times change.
With the Board of Trustees during this past year, we've been talking about how important it is for a congregation to have a vision. And we are finally ready to begin exploring what the vision of All Souls Church will be.
When we asked 3 of our young boys what vision means, they said it was like a plan or a dream that we act on.
I think a vision is an idea that you try to work on.
My idea is to redesign the church.
In our many conversations about the vision we see for our church, 2 things stand out. One is of a church reaching into the community to serve and to make it a better, more just place. The other is that All Souls stimulates and encourages each other's spiritual growth.
Here is what board member Beth McKinney says about service to the community and the world.
The Overflow Shelter is a place where the homeless can come to get in from the cold in the winter at night. And I think that's one of a real important service that we provide to the community, is providing meals on a monthly basis to the shelter.
And Building and Grounds co-chair Ruth Lane points out that when we become involved in the community, others come to understand the nature of people who are attracted to Unitarian Universalism.
We should work side by side with people of all colors, abilities, disabilities, and different faiths.
One of the ways the people of All Souls have been making life easier for some of the people in our community is through what is called the Dove Program. Here is Cindy Hutchison, Dove Program Coordinator at the AIDS Project of Southern Vermont, speaking about All Souls' involvement in that valuable service.
The folks from All Souls would come and pick up a dove off the dove board and purchase the item. Typically they bring the item back to the church where there is a drop-off basket or a bucket, and the items are put into that bucket with the dove. We are so happy and grateful for All Souls, all of the brothers and sisters at All Souls Church who participate in this program. Without it, we would not be able to do what we do for our clients, and our clients would not be able to do without you.
I'm Melinda Busnow, the Executive Director of the Brattleboro Area Drop-In Center. Reverend Barbara Hansen from All Souls Church was the one who said, oh, I would like to organize the meals at the Overflow and get all the volunteers. And she pulled the faith community together initially, and then as it became better known that we needed help, the business community, neighborhood groups, families, other people joined in to provide meals.
Today is the first Sunday of the month, and instead of collecting our offering for the general operating fund of the church, we gather money for the minister's discretionary fund. And what that is used for is if someone comes to Barbara with a need for food or heat or gas or something really elemental, that she can give them money for that.
I'm a nonprofit manager by trade, and so community involvement and volunteerism and the nonprofit, the impact of the nonprofit world on a community is very dear to me. Every month that has 5 Sundays in it, that last Sunday's offering goes specifically to an organization, the entire collection plate, and those organizations are chosen by our Social Action Committee.
Besides finding fulfillment through service to others, we seek to address our own needs for intellectual and spiritual enlightenment. Christina Gibbons tells us how we can grow in confidence and clarity of personal faith through lay-led services.
Over the past 3 years, I find myself growing in confidence, daring, and sense of spiritual groundedness.
Steve Squires brings this quest for personal fulfillment into focus when he asks, why are we here?
Why are we here? Well, we do have a good set of ground rules on how we should respect and listen to each other. We discuss religion and religious issues, but we leave each person to sort out what their own beliefs are on the mystical issues.
One of the ways by which we show what our personal faith means to us is to invite others to share our worship and activities. We want to call people in.
Here's what our president, Sue Graff, found on a friend's blog. She used it to initiate an early dialogue about this quest for a vision.
What do you need to do to fly? Write it down. Writing something down brings an idea into the material world. It is the beginning of a quest, an adventure, the genesis of a dream. It is a powerful act of intention. And once you write it down, a thought becomes a goal. They say God is in the details. Life is in the details. They also say love is in the little things. Think about it. The broad vision, plus the details and the little things, is extraordinarily powerful. Having a larger vision is good, and backing it up with small steps is satisfying. Cities are built brick by brick. A life is lived moment by moment. And who could not envision our mighty Grand Canyon? Never forget what a tiny, continuous drop of water can do. Write it all down and make it count. Get ready in the moment for the moment to come. Prepare to fly.
The stars, let love bring you home again. May joy and compassion be your constant friends. Let love lead you, peace be with you. Let love lead you on your way.
Job opportunity somewhere in the Midwest. There's nothing wrong with the Midwest. Show the people there are happy. They got green hills and forests. It snows in the winter. They got gardens in the summer. There are swimming holes and cafes, but there's no ocean there. There's no balsam fir. There's no stone walls, no fishing towns, no dirt roads, no mountains, no town like this New England town. And I'd learn to adapt. I am so good at that. To find places to play, to be people who listen. I'll tell you now, you'll be living with someone who left most of herself behind. Don't ask me to go, don't ask me to go. I have put down my roots in this New England snow. They have dug down as deep and as wide as they'll go. Pull them up and I won't bloom again. Pull them up and I won't bloom again. Pull them up and I won't bloom again. Well, you'd probably find something out in California. I used to live in California. It is sunny and progressive, and every town on the freeway runs right into the next one. It is crowded and polluted, and the people are so laid back, and there's an ocean there. There's no balsam fir. There's no stone walls, no fishing towns, no seasons to speak of. It is lucrative and hollow inside. And I'd learn to adapt. I am so good at that. Find places to play, to be people who listen. I'll tell you now, you'll be living with someone who left most of herself behind. Pull them up and I won't bloom again. Again, no, again.